We're back with a lot to talk about. I'm Charlie Sykes, and Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning and welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was, who knew that soccer could be so corrupt? The Justice Department issues racketeering charges against top FIFA officials who allegedly rigged decisions to award the World Cup to Russia and Qatar. Violence explodes in Baltimore, Chicago, and right here in Milwaukee as evidence spreads that police are backing off in the wake of protest riots and criminal charges. More candidates jump into the presidential race, and the state legislature rushes to finish a state budget with most of the big decisions apparently being made behind closed doors. We start with one of those decisions, a deal to finance a new Bucks arena. The price tag for taxpayers, $250 million. Now, here's a rough outline. The state would chip in $80 million plus another $20 million to pay off the current Bradley Center's debt. The city would build a parking garage and contribute $12 million from a new tax district. The county would let the state collect $80 million in uncollected debt, and a new entertainment convention district would come up with $93 million paid for with local car rental taxes, hotel taxes, and a 0.5% tax on food and beverages. The Bucks owners and former owner Herb Cole have already said they would contribute $250 million. The deal, obviously, is still subject to change and needs approval from the state legislature, the Common Council, and the Wisconsin Center District Board. Joining me on our panel this morning, defense attorney Dan Adams, former state representative Michelle Litchens, political strategist Linda Bruin. Okay, Lynn, your sense, good, bad, ugly, what on this the Bucks deal?
Well, I don't think it's a good deal, and I think we have to do a caveat here. None of us have seen this in writing.
Right.
This is these are components that have been leaked to the press, and we don't really even know if they're 100% accurate. But the bottom line is the city and the county aren't contributing very much, and that is, from day one, that was considered the basic building block that the city and the county would have to kick in. And it's very clear, at least for me in looking at this deal, that there aren't any local cheerleaders for this. So I don't think it's good for the taxpayers. Governor Walker said that taxes aren't going to be raised. Well, that's ridiculous. The Wisconsin Center District Board will be raising taxes and extending taxes in order to help cover this. Plus, it's all based on bonding and debt payments that we might not even realize.
Okay, Michelle Litchens.
You know, it's probably not the best deal we can come up with. I'm very thankful that the legislature dwindled down the governor's initial number of $220 million down to $80 million. This is what happens when you have negotiations. I really wish this was a standalone bill. Obviously, I wish we had some Democrat buy-in from the city.
I want to get to that because, of course, there's going to be a push to that politically. But in terms of substance, now, Lynn said that there's not a lot of local contribution. Well, the county is coming up with $80 million. Sort of. I can't recall the last time I've ever seen a deal that basically says Chris Abele is going to bundle up $80 million in uncollectible debt and say, here's my contribution.
And that's still a detail in the works. And to answer the question, is it a good deal, a bad deal, or an ugly deal? It's an ugly deal, but I think it's the deal that's going to have the most buy-in from all leaders, county, city, and state. The state being the most important because they are ultimately backing all of the bonds. All of the bonds.
They technically were responsible for paying for the Bradley Center repairs, right? And that debt also. So if the Bucks left, our state would be on the hook for $120 million regardless.
There's no $0 option here. And, obviously you do have a lot of different players here, but this is a terrible deal. Now, before I get into this, I want to keep the Bucks here. I want to see this, something happen. But this is so exponentially worse than I thought it was going to be. Remember when Governor Walker rolled out his plan? It was basically the Bucks are going to pay their own way. It's going to be this jock tax. Well, now it's nakedly $250 million, and it will rely on sales taxes, including a beverage and drink tax, which is regressive. Beyond that, you have this bizarre thing with the uncollected debt, which I call the deadbeat cousin Vinny deal, which is basically, imagine going into a bank. And they want you to give $20,000 for a down payment on the house. You say, I don't have $20,000, but I lent my deadbeat cousin Vinny $20,000, and he's not going to pay me back. So what if I give you his last known phone number? Would you take that? That's part of the deal. You don't even have access to this center district money for 13 years.
Can we compare it to the Miller Park? I mean, anybody who looks back in time says, was it a good thing to actually have a 7-county tax and have the brewers here? I would say we have a cultural and really a financial benefit of having the brewers here. And that tax was worse because that was actually a regressive tax spread over people who don't have a direct benefit. Here, I think it's just a better financing mechanism.
Bottom line, though, in these negotiations, they did not get Tom Barrett to step up. They did not get the local officials. That $12 million from from the TIF district is less than 1/4 the amount that he came up with for the trolley. So let's talk politically. You're a former Republican legislator. If this is in the budget, Republicans alone will own this. They will have to pass a budget with all of these cuts to the UW system and everything, and every Democrat in the state's going to run against them saying, but you had this corporate welfare. Should this be in the budget?
Again, it might have to be, just because there isn't an advocating for this and putting the Democrat votes together for a standalone bill to get this done. So it might have to be in the budget. Because the number is so much less than it would have been if the bucks left and that the state still had to cover the loss for the Bradley Center. I do think you're going to have Republicans support it.
I think that this is one of those issues. It needs to go out of the budget, have a standalone bill, make the Democrats put up or shut up, have them have their fingerprints on it.
Chances are they're going to shut up on it, though.
This should be a bipartisan buy-in, because otherwise, I got to tell you, I think this is going to be a political loser. You can write the ads. It will take, an 8-year-old could write the ads against every Republican that votes for all those budget cuts and then votes to, do this thing for the bucks. I mean, we've lived through this with Miller Park. So what is your glass half full? What has your glass half empty this week? Let's go around the table. Dan Adams, you're first.
My glass is half full because with the arena development, new Northwestern Mutual, Couture, and 833 East Michigan buildings, Milwaukee is undergoing a $2 billion facelift of the downtown's physical space. My glass is half empty because state and local policymakers seem clueless on how to foster and bring new job-creating enterprises and entrepreneurs to Milwaukee. A real estate renaissance is exciting, but a commercial and industrial renewal is what we really need.
Michelle Litchens.
My glass is half empty because of the dismal Brewers baseball performance this year, but it is half full because the Packers started practice this week.
Linda Bruin.
Well, my middle-class glass is half full because global oil prices have fallen sharply, bringing the lowest gasoline prices in years, and prices are expected to fall even more. But the glasses of Fortune 500 energy companies are breaking. ExxonMobil and Chevron have lost more than $95 billion in 2015.
Well, my glass is half full because there's a lot of support for keeping the bucks here in town. It's half empty because that deal negotiated behind closed doors gives the term smoke and mirrors a bad name. Next on Sunday Insight, will the prevailing wage finally prevail? It's called prevailing wage, and it's been on the books since 1931. Critics say the law artificially inflates the cost of public projects by requiring the payment of wages that are often much higher than the market, sometimes by as much as 45%. A study by the nonpartisan Wisconsin Taxpayer Alliance says that repealing the law could save taxpayers as much as $300 million a year. But the law is strongly backed by unions and big contractors. Last week, Governor Scott Walker said he would sign legislation to repeal the law, and a bill to do so was endorsed by the State Assembly's Labor Committee. Despite that, Speaker Robin Vos says he won't let the measure come up for a vote, saying that Republicans lack the votes. So where are we? What's going to happen with the prevailing wage, Michelle Litchens?
Well, I think right now we know that a full repeal is not going to pass the Senate. It couldn't even make it out of committee. So you have members of both sides, especially the no votes in the Senate, working together with some assembly representatives on coming up with some sort of reform that is palatable to both sides.
Okay, when are we going to see that?
We'll probably see that before they're done putting the budget together.
I mean, at some point, don't you actually have to say, because all these folks are saying we don't want to repeal it, we want to reform it. Well, let's see what the reform is going to be, then we can actually have a debate about it.
They're actually going to debate it then in the Joint Finance Committee.
Okay, Dan Adams.
Well, I wonder if Robin Vos ever feels like the hero in a monster movie. You think you kill the monster and then it pops back up, and that's kind of the prevailing wage advocate or people who would like to do away with it. I think that citizens of Wisconsin deserve a straight up vote, up or down vote. Where do you lie on this issue? I mean, that's why we elect our officials, to take the hard stands and actually put it up.
Well, I agree on that. I mean, this whole notion that, well, okay, let's not have a vote. Well, let's find out. The only way you can find out whether you have the votes is to have the vote on all of this. And it seems like a just odd reluctance to do something, particularly when you have a budget that doesn't have a lot of good stuff in it. I mean, this is a budget with a lot of cuts. And if you can provide some sort of relief to local governments, if you can provide some sort of tax relief, why not take it if you're fiscally conservative, particularly when you have that Bucks arena out there? You disagree?
I have 2 points on this. First of all, there's not going to be a public debate on this. This reform package that they're going to come up with, that'll be voted on probably in the middle of the night like the legislature does everything. But as far as Robin Vos goes and the majority leader, Fitzgerald, they are actually doing their job protecting their caucus. Their caucus members are saying to them, don't allow a vote here. It will hurt us in the next elections. So I don't blame them as much as I wonder what's going on with those Republicans at home, that they can't convince their own constituents.
By protect, you mean hiding the elected representatives from being accountable to the voters back home.
The job of the leadership is to protect their caucus and protect the majority.
In the Assembly, if it's not going to pass the Senate, like so many bills, the Assembly takes every tough bill forward. Because there's no reason to call people out.
Why?
Because if their constituents are not going to support, there's
none
of it's going to pass.
That is how the representative system ought to work. You get people on record. You find out, who walks the walk, who talks the talk. You've got a lot of these representatives that said we are free market fiscal conservatives. If they want to vote with the unions, if they want to vote with the crony capitalists, then I say let's put them.
Wisconsin is still a very purple state. Many of the representatives had Obama win their district, and they have to go back to those districts in 2016 saying, I voted to support right to work in the state of Wisconsin.
Well, that's shocking.
That is a risky vote they took this year. Why don't you give them just another year off until the 20s?
Do you know how old I am?
Yes,
I can actually remember when Republicans ran on, we do the big and bold things. We decide whether we're going to stand with the taxpayers or the special interests. And now it's like, oh, no, it's all about the re-election.
Do they actually think they're going to lose their majority over this one vote?
I think they're convinced that, right to work was a big step. And they have a strong enough majority to continue to make a lot of big changes, such as expanding school choice this year and a number of other things in the state.
All of which are the things they were elected to do. If you have 63 votes in the Assembly, if you don't do it now, when are you going to do
let's
it?
See what they come up with the changes.
Here's the irony. They're claiming we might lose the majority if we vote to save taxpayers $300 million. Wow. Imagine that. And yet, the same folks are pushing ahead with this Bucks arena. If anything is going to cost you the majority, it's going to be that deal. Now, you may not want to hear it. You don't want to hear that. But we're going to tell you anyway. Let's hand out some unsolicited advice. Dan Adams, you're first.
To DA John Chisholm, read the Public Policy Forum's report on marijuana in Milwaukee and adopt the report's recommendation. Stop making felons out of citizens who are caught with small amounts of pot. Really, a felony for a joint is not a good use of taxpayer resources.
Michelle Litchens.
My advice is for Mayor Barrett. Mayor, it's time you show that you care more about Milwaukee's education, police, and city development than representatives from around the state who are forced to care about Milwaukee because it looks like you are only passionate about your trolley.
Linda Bruin.
In 2013 and 14, French troops working for the United Nations systematically raped children in Central Africa, but they weren't prosecuted because the United Nations peacekeepers have immunity. The UN has protected peacekeepers in at least 6 other countries. It's time that the UN gives up blanket immunity.
I actually did not know that. Former State Senator Mike Ellis came on my show last Friday and he warned his former colleagues that if they refuse to touch prevailing wage and they vote to spend $250 million in taxpayer money on that Bucks arena deal, they will lose the state Senate. I have not always agreed with Senator Ellis in the past, but this time he is dead right. Next on Sunday Insight, the fight over reforming failing schools in Milwaukee. School reform is back in the news. The new state budget may include a measure that will allow failing schools in Milwaukee to be moved under a new turnaround commissioner who would be appointed by the county executive. But opponents are pushing back, and last week, the Milwaukee Teachers Union held a rally telling the legislature to keep its hands off our schools. But the school that the union chose raised some eyebrows. The protest against the reform measure took place at Our Avenue Elementary School, which has a reading proficiency rate of 0.0%. You heard that right. No student at that school can read at a proficient level. Not one. But that was the school the union chose to argue against the rescue plan. Dan Adams.
Whenever the MTEA does something, I'm always amazed that they can take it that far and have such bad judgment. And this is no stranger.
This was like something out of The Onion.
It's unbelievable. But they really have no moral authority on the issue of having better education outcomes for poor kids, mostly black and brown kids in the city of Milwaukee. They have no moral authority at this point.
Michelle Lichens.
Doesn't this just prove why MPS needs to lose some authority over these failing schools? These teachers also, how dare they just care about their paycheck? That's all they care about, their paychecks and benefits, because if they didn't, first of all, they would not be, showing off the school where the children can't read at the school. They'd actually care about reforming their own
they did a
schools.
public service by highlighting a school that again highlights why we need to do something. 0.0%.
There's two sides to every pancake.
Right.
So I actually went to the MTA's website, and I wanted to read what they said. And they're claiming that our school was a high poverty, highly segregated, but high achieving school before the Republicans reduced state funding and So I actually thought, well, let's test that out. So I went back and looked at ours proficiency schools from years back. And guess what? 5-6 years ago, 10% of the kids at our were reading proficiently. That's not a high-achieving school. So they didn't even do their homework right on the case they're trying to make. So they lost a lot of credibility in this.
Well, here's the real tragedy. When you see a protest in front of a school like that, why would we never expect it to be a protest of the failure? Where is the outrage? Where the folks that you never hear about, who are never upset about the fact that there are 55 failing schools in Milwaukee? I mean, where is the outrage? Why are parents, why are people in the community not ringing that school with protests saying, look, what are you doing in there? Our kids are not learning how to read.
It's unbelievable. And there are high-performing schools that are 80, high poverty, high minority schools. You look at Carmen High School, which is one of the best in the entire country. You look at, Milwaukee College Prep. They're doing really good things. St. Marcus is a private school doing really great things with the same population of kids. And so when I hear Bob Peterson, talk about how we can't do it because of Scott Walker, he's just completely wrong.
Well, also, there's that soft bigotry of low expectations, which is, yes, it is true that you are dealing with a high poverty area, but as you point out, there are schools right down the street that are doing a good job, and this protecting of the status quo, but I think it was actually interestingly enough, a teachable moment that they chose that school with a 0% proficiency rating. What is it you don't get this week? Let's go around the table. Dan Adams, you're first.
Charlie, I don't get why the legislature doesn't simplify the complex school finance formulas for Wisconsin schools. School funding is the most esoteric area of state public policy. Straightforward rationales of who is receiving what would go a long way toward taking some of the hot air out of the education debates.
Michelle Lichens.
So, Charlie, what I don't get is if the Senate can't pass prevailing wage repeal out of committee, and if Senator Fitzgerald says he doesn't have the votes to pass a full repeal in the Senate, why don't you start harassing the Senate to take a vote instead of the Assembly?
I just might. Linda Bruin.
What I don't get is Governor Walker when he said that changing state law to allow the Wisconsin Center District Board to bond and raise taxes for a new basketball stadium isn't actually raising taxes because the board already has taxing authority. When county taxpayers start paying more, I hope they remember the governor's false claim.
Oh, that was facepalm bad. Okay, so what I don't get is how did soccer become the world's most corrupt sport? I mean, does it have something to do with that flopping thing, or were they just bored because nobody ever scores? Next on Sunday Inside, our panel picks the winners and losers of the week. But first, here's your morning news update. It's time for our panel to pick the winners and losers of the week. Dan Adams, you're first.
My loser this week is former Republican Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, who was indicted this week. The charges against Hastert read like a mystery novel with allegations of payoffs for some unexplained prior conduct. Look for the other scandalous shoe to drop soon. My winners, the Nebraska legislature, who this week, with bipartisan support, overrode their governor's veto of a bill ending capital punishment in that state. Nebraska joins Wisconsin and 17 other states that have abolished the death penalty.
Michelle Lichens.
My winners are Republican presidential primary voters. Unlike the Democrats, Republicans continue to have good quality, strong candidates announce they are running for the GOP presidential nomination. Finally, we have multiple candidates to be excited about. My loser is Justice Shirley Abrahamson, who has appealed a federal court ruling temporarily denying her to attempt to remain as Chief Justice. Shirley, let it go. The voters have spoken. You are no longer Chief Justice. Just let it go.
Linda Bruin.
Well, my winners are Attorney General Loretta Lynch and FBI Director Jim Comey, who indicted 14 FIFA soccer officials last week for racketeering, money laundering, and wire fraud. Lynch led the impressive international effort, which must be embarrassing to congressional Republicans who held up her nomination for 6 months. My loser is Wisconsin State Representative Chaya for her bill that allows people without bachelor degrees, even high school dropouts, to teach middle and high school students. Chaya acknowledged that this will likely result in Wisconsin having the nation's lowest teacher licensing standards and that no district asked for this. She should know that most people are not Bill Gates.
Whatever. Loser, the economy. On Friday, the government said the economy shrank by 0.7% in the first quarter. That is the third quarter of contraction since this recovery allegedly began. Winner, former Marquette basketball star George Thompson, whose number 24 won't be returned to circulation after all. It will stay, instead, retired. Marquette now says that reports to the contrary were the result of miscommunication. Something that seems to be happening a lot at Marquette these days. Thanks for joining us today for my radio show Monday morning on News Radio 620 WTMJ from 8:30 until noon. Have a great week.